Welcome, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad you guys are joining us. We're really excited. We're here in Atlanta Mania we only have like half the faculty here up on the stage, but there's a lot of us that are going to be here for a full hour. We have almost 300 people registered for the webinar. We expect, I'm going to guess, about 80 people to show up. Usually that's what happens. And then we get more people listen to the podcast and more people that also watch the recording. So I'm very excited. These are four of my favorite people, and we invited Patrick. And we're going to be talking about how to improve flexibility and mobility to prevent injuries, enhance performance, support long-term joint health, et cetera, how to work with your clients and your group exercise members. And I'm here with wonderful people. Ruston Webb is with the Mobility Recipe. And Ruston has been in the industry 24 years. He's got a master's in human movement, and he's also a global expert in mobility training. He co-authored a college curriculum with ACE and created the Mobility Recipe, which is just kicking it here at the conventions. It's always sold out. He's also got a certification trusted by over 1,600 fitness pros, and he has developed targeted programs for joint pain solutions. So we're excited to have Ruston with us. We've got the beautiful Keli Roberts, beautiful and brilliant. It's like a double whammy with that one. And Keli is an ACM exercise physiologist, a decorated fitness professional with ACE certifications, senior fitness, NASM corrective exercise, FAI aging specialist. She is also a National Fitness Hall of Fame inductee. Basically, I think who's you and I are inducted because we're old. Okay, and sorry about that. And then best female presenter, lifetime achievement awards, blah blah blah. Keli also works extensively with SCW, leading our active aging certification, our personal training certification, and we are pulling her into that much more. And then next to her is Amber Toole. She's an SCW faculty member with an expertise in fitness, nutrition coaching, and studio management. She owns not only one club, but she's now expanded to have a private Pilates studio as well. She holds a degree in physical education and health. She's got over 30 years in the business, although she looks like she's only had about 15. Maybe it's the shoes, I'm not sure. She owns the Training Toole. I love that name. I love it. And it's a wonderful wellness studio in Ocala, Florida. And then we have Patrick Mummy with us. He earned it. Yeah, you can pat each other on the back later. Here we go. He's earned a baseball scholarship to San Diego State University, and he graduated with a degree in athletic training. He founded Symmetry for Health and patented the Align Smart technology, and his company is now known as Align Smart. I did it. It's amazing, right? Keli did it as well. We both did it. It's a measurable system. Did you, Melissa?
Yes, I'm chopped liver.
Yeah. I think Melissa did it. We're not sure why, but she did. Okay, and then we've got a measurable system for postural assessment and corrective exercise. He's authored 3 books, The Physics of Pain, Becoming Pain-Free, and he's a sought-after speaker all over. You just left Idea World. Yes. Yeah, packed sessions. And then we've got Melissa Layne, who is a kinesiology department faculty member at the University of North Georgia, which she loves.
I love it.
She loves teaching students. She's been in the industry for over 35 years. She actually created the SCW Nutrition Coaching for Fitness Professionals certification, the Nutrition, Hormones and Metabolism certification. She's taught our active aging cert, and she's really been leading our Aqua cert, which has kind of exploded with the industry needing more water exercise instructors. She holds a master's degree in education and exercise science, a bachelor's degree in physical education, associate's degree in medical technology. I'm exhausted. And hi, my name is Sara. Okay, that's about it. I'm a lawyer gone awry. That's what I think is happening. So Melissa, I'm going to start with you. And what is the difference between flexibility and mobility?
Flexibility is the range of motion around a joint that you hold statically that does not have an outside force acting upon it, whereas mobility is going to have an outside force acting upon it, such as gravity, and mobility is going to require strength, which flexibility does not require.
Interesting.
You want more than that?
Yeah.
Okay. So mobility, so in a lot of what we do is talk about physics. And I kind of equate it to mass versus weight. So when you talk about mass, you're talking about the whole body as a whole around the force of gravity, where gravity itself is the mass as it pertains to weight with gravity. Same with flexibility and mobility. Mobility really involves the entire body, where flexibility, as Melissa so astutely put, is really based on your different joints, because you can have different flexibilities throughout your body. And people make that mistake. They say, oh, you're really flexible. Well, we see clients all the time that have really flexible hamstrings and really inflexible thoracic or shoulder girdles, right? So you can't just lump sum that. So mobility, I would say, is more the overall body's ability to move around gravity, where flexibility is testing at different levels of your body through the joints.
Okay. I'll play with this game. Yeah, so I agree with both of you. I look at mobility as the range of motion of a joint versus flexibility being the passive lengthening of the muscle or group of muscles. So we can go down this in the weeds as far as we want to go, but both are obviously neurological responses. A lot of times I think fit pros, they don't quite see, they see everything as tissue based, right? So flexibility is tissue based, but they don't see the neurological side and that piece to the puzzle. We're talking about injuries today, so I just want to kind of preemptively bring this up, but a lot of this is a neurological response where the body's always trying to keep us safe, right? It's its main job. It's going to override eating, sleeping, whatever else you want to do. It's focused on safety. So when we look at injuries and we look at mobility and flexibility, we have to see what the brain's trying to guard and kind of protect against as we talk through all this stuff. But yeah, the main difference, I think, for me at least, in what we teach is joint range of motion. And that involves flexibility. So you still need flexibility to have good joint range of motion. But like you said, you can see somebody who's really flexible have terrible mobility. And I've seen people with really good mobility and terrible flexibility through the muscles. So it is an interesting thing we could get really into the weeds in this, but it doesn't mean one equals the other.
Thank you. That was interesting. And it just seems everybody seems to agree with flexibility. It's interesting that I think you always think of yoga. Like I'm going to bend over and I'm going to hold my toes and I'm just going to pull and pull and pull and I'm going to be flexible. But then I'm going to hold warrior one and go to warrior two and go deeper into it. That's my mobility. It requires strength. It uses gravity, etc. So I like that, your definitions. And how can limited mobility increase injury risk during workouts? Kelly, you want to start with that?
Sure.
Okay, here we go.
The body has different areas that are naturally more mobile or more stable. And when you have an area of the body that is supposed to be mobile and it's not, the area above or below it that is stable will take the hit. So for example, I had a client who had a lower back injury, but really it was a lower back symptom of a thoracic spine that wasn't moving and hips that were immobile. The hips and thoracic spine should have good mobility. The knees should be stable, lumbar spine should be stable, ankles should be mobile, feet should be reasonably stiff or stable enough to push off. Well, she was sitting at a desk a lot. She had a desk job and she got on the machine where you go like this. You know, the one to get rid of your love handles, that one. Well, she had a thoracic spine that didn't move. She had a thoracic spine that was immobile. And when she rotated, her lumbar spine rotated and she herniated 2 lumbar discs. So the body will compensate, the body will always find a way to move. And it will compensate and steal the mobility from a stable joint above or below the area that's not moving. And I've seen it again and again and again with my clients. So when we work on our mobility and our flexibility, especially our mobility, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the ankle, hip, thoracic spine, and glenohumeral joint, because they're the areas of the body that need good mobility, whereas the scapulothoracic joint, the lumbar spine and the knees and foot functions predominantly as a stable structure.
I find that extremely interesting because, I mean, I've got this bad back and I've now got bulging discs, and somebody was talking about, oh, you should get a fusion. Well, you get a fusion and then what's gonna happen? The discs right above it are gonna start popping out as well. So you have to look at that. And so that's one of the physicians that I went to see who said, no, do not do that. And I see a chiropractor who works with a lot of the vibration equipment, and he doesn't snap you. And I said, well, why aren't you popping? You know, I heard it's a release of air. And he said, Sarah, you're moving the joints and accentuating the mobility on the joints that are already mobile. Why should I focus on that? I've got to focus on the areas up or down, which I think is interesting. So Amber, you work with a lot of Pilates and you do a lot of personal training. How can limited mobility increase injuries during the workouts?
So I also see a lot of this with my clients, and Kelly made great points there, and she alluded to a word called compensation. And this is what happens with a lot of my clients. And I will say, my eye is just looking at them like something is not right. So they're not moving in their regular, normal way. You can just see that something is off with them. And a lot of times that compensation happens. So now their whole entire body is thrown off from this one place. Maybe it can be more than one, but let's just say one place where they're not very mobile, and then that's going to throw off their whole movement pattern, which is going to lead to them doing things repetitively in a bad position, potentially, which then can lead to injury. So as Kelly was talking about, so somebody will come in and say, oh, my back hurts, and they think it's their back that's the problem, but really it might have come from they had something going on with their foot or their ankle, and it just traveled right up the body. So we know that as fitness professionals. Sometimes the general population doesn't know that. They don't realize how important it is to keep our bodies moving well and to try to be as balanced and as neutral as we possibly can.
I would say 95% of our clients that come in to see us specifically are because they're in pain. They've been in chronic pain. They've been seeing people throughout the gamut of Western medicine or not, to try to treat their pain. And what she brilliantly said is all we talk about is compensation. I will say that of the 95% of people that come in to see us for chronic pain, 90% of the time their pain is coming from somewhere else. It's not the pain. The pain, when you start talking about gravity and physics and mobility and flexibility and everything else, there's an engineering and an architectural necessity that the body has to have in order to abide by the law of gravity for us to be able to stand and function correctly. And again, going into the weeds, it starts at, our research has shown it starts at 10 years old. The kids start to compensate because of sitting at desks too much. But they don't know anything's wrong because they're too young to experience pain, because the body will adapt to avoid pain. That is its first response. Your brain says, ooh, there's a potential, I'm going to shift to avoid that pain. And ultimately, by the time you get into pain, and it's usually exacerbated by an incident. Right? I was just talking to someone yesterday. I fell snowboarding. Like, okay, well, if you were aligned and flexible and mobile, you would have withstood that. You probably would have got injured. But because you were so crooked and out of alignment and compensated because of repetitive stress your whole life, you broke because your body didn't have the ability to withstand that force. So it's really interesting when we talk about, like you said, most of the public understands Western medicine, my knee hurts, I'm gonna go see an orthopedic and talk about my knee. Where all of us on this panel know it's usually probably coming from somewhere else. But I'm an assessment guy, right? If you don't assess it, then how do you know where it's coming from?
Can I add something really quick? I think we also have to look at the fact, I know we're gonna talk about how often to train mobility, but we have to look at the fact that when you have an aging female that is postmenopausal, this is usually not their first goal of fitness. It's usually strength train for keeping our muscle mass, preventing sarcopenia. It is jump training to prevent osteoporosis. We, as we age, lose the two most important hormones after menopause for the elasticity of all our connective tissue. A female has relaxin, men don't have any relaxin. We have relaxin so we can open our pelvic girdle and birth our baby. Relaxin along with progesterone are what increases our flexibility when we are fertile. Once we go through menopause, progesterone can drop to 0 and relaxin can come pretty darn close to that. And this isn't something that we are concentrating on, and mobility should be something that an aging female is concentrating on.
That's interesting. I'm just gonna throw this out there because I know the answer, but do you recommend them to take these hormonal supplements?
There are positives and negatives to hormone replacement therapy, and it is something that should individually be decided between you and your primary care physician.
This is all great. Yeah, I want to kind of go off what Kelly said. We talk about mobility training. I think a lot of the pros are wanting to maybe get into it and learn more about it. She hit the nail on the head as far as where should we be applying mobility? Where should we be focused on? She kind of nailed it. It's ankles, right? Hips. And the body's telling us this by looking at its range of motion. If you look at the thoracic spine, per vertebrae, you're looking at 4 to 5 degrees of rotation. It's giving us 60 degrees of rotation up top. Well, the lumbar, it's only like 3 degrees of rotation per vertebrae. So now you're looking at 15 degrees. So the body's telling you where the mobility should be. But when we start to apply these different exercises, these different methods, she nailed it. Those are the spots where we're looking for shoulders, glenohumeral joint, thoracic spine. I used to work in orthopedic or medical device with orthopedic surgeons, just to kind of hit where she was going with where pain's coming from. Where do you think the #1 orthopedic surgeons are in the world? They're in Colorado. They're in Vail. They're in Aspen. And here's why. Okay, if I put you in ski boots, she just said we need ankle mobility. They're waiting at the top of the mountain, right? Because you're in boots. We took away mobility from the ankle. So what happens to the joint above or below? Well, the foot's still in the boot, right? So that's pretty safe. But what's next? Our knees. We need mobility in the ankle so that the knee can properly just hinge like it's supposed to and just flex and extend. So we take that away and the knee goes, oh, I'll help with that. Then you get most people who sit too much, they don't have good hip mobility and all the ranges of motion there, which we're looking at like 7, including circumduction. So then again, the knees take the brunt in and all these surgeons get to sit there and just rake in the money, right? So that's kind of an example of where pain's coming from, how we get injured. We take away mobility from the body. Hopefully that kind of hits home for where pain can come from.
It's very interesting. Of course, you're talking about Colorado. I hate you. Because,
Hey, I lived there.
oh, blah, blah, blah. I skied 58 days last year.
Oh,
Yeah. And of course, I know I only have 2 legs, but I've torn my meniscus 3 times. So it's definitely what happens. And these physicians there, it's automatic surgery. Now, finally, they're beginning to say, don't get the surgery on your meniscus, do PRP, do physical therapy, strengthening the muscles around it so that then my hips are stronger, my legs are stronger so they can handle the rotation. And the most injuries that occur during skiing is when it's, this cold, wet snow. It's the end of the day and the snow is melted a little bit because it's so sunny in Colorado, 300 sunny days out of the year. And you just stick and your feet are stuck and your knees are just whacked out. So yeah, it's like limited mobility definitely increases injury risk. And I thought it was interesting that the question says limited mobility increases injury risk. It didn't say limited flexibility. Can anybody comment on that? Kelly's shaking her head. Here you go, here you go.
Well, flexibility is just, we all agree, range of motion around a joint. Mobility is your ability to control that range of motion through gravity and ground reaction forces. So if you lack the strength and coordination and neurological ability to control that range of motion, which is what I think of as mobility, then you will get injured.
Expound, can I expound? So people have this expectation or belief that if you're really flexible, then you're healthy. Well, guess what? Every joint has a limit. I had a client the other day who came in and she says, my hamstrings are really tight. And she bent over and palmed the ground. I'm like, no, at some point you're gonna be tight anyway within that range of motion, right? And if you're too flexible, you have what's called joint laxity, which means there's no stability at that joint. So if you take all those joints and add them up, and if you were to find which one had joint laxity, which one was too inflexible, that is what defines mobility, is your ability to actually take all of these joints with your head as the CPU controlling all of it to determine how well it can control this body around the force of gravity. Skiing is really bad for me.
Patrick, I wanna go off something you and I've talked about. Well, how are we born, right? When we're born, when my wife and I have 3 kids, when they come out, they're completely mobile, right? They're just flopping around. You have to hold their head up. So we come out mobile and everything's mobile. I wouldn't really go into the muscle, right, yet, because as babies, it's just mobile joints. And then we build out the stability. So when we talk about how do we approach clients and how do we avoid injuries, we do want to hit mobility first. We want to make sure they have the range of motion, not necessarily total end range of motion beyond, hands flat on the ground from a toe touch, but we're looking for good range of motion in those specific joints, and then we build stability around it, and then you load it, right, and progress from there. But if you look at the baby, at a baby, and that growth from what they come out super mobile, and we lose that function as we get older from sitting too much in our daily lives. We have to bring them back. One of the things we teach in the mobility recipe is rolling patterns. We literally get on the floor, we look like babies, and we're learning doing, upper extremity rotation and extension through the spine and trying to get that back with a client. It's amazing what you'll feel just doing some rolling patterns and getting those ranges of motion back.
I wanted to make a comment when you were talking about laxity in the joints, and because Sara brought up that I have a Pilates studio, those are some of the hardest clients to coach and train in Pilates. And I think that it's really important for our audience to realize that being super flexible is also not great because of that. And both of the guys brought up the word control. People need to be able to control the movement of their body. So when you have someone who has super lax joints and or is very mobile and very flexible, getting them to get into the proper alignment in Pilates or anything that they do, but I'm thinking about the Pilates, it's really hard because a lot of times they don't have that control, and it's almost like they can't turn on the muscles that they need to keep the joint from being hyperextended.
All right, great. Which body areas are most affected by poor mobility? I mean, I know Kelly, you started with the back, but Ruston, I'm going to start with you. Like, with your clients, what do you feel? Which body areas are most affected?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this from a cookie cutter standpoint because it's really hard to go. There's so many outliers and variables, but we typically see poor hip mobility as being the number one because of sitting. It's just sitting's the new smoking, right? We hear that all the time. And so we see hip problems and lack of range of motion in the hips, which can go up or down, right? You'll hear practitioners say it's a top down, that's how we approach the body, or bottom up. it's really both. Like you can't subscribe to one. It can come from so many different directions. And then the spine, right? So you take the hip flexion, you get stuck in this position like we're all in right now. We're all just smoking up here together. This is great. But you add that flexion, you create, you create an asymmetry, right? The way we sit in a car, the way we start to move, the way we're sitting on our phones. And then all of a sudden the spine starts to adapt and we start to lose mobility through the thoracic spine. So those are the two, I would say, biggest issues with mobility. And then those can trace into lower back pain, knee pain, neck pain, all sorts of stuff. And that compensation just flows from there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Hips and thoracic spine seem to be the two biggest ones, but the thoracic spine really feeds shoulder mobility.
Yeah.
So for example, if you go into a thoracic kyphosis and you try and flex your shoulders, you actually can't until you get into some thoracic extension. So what a lot of people see as a shoulder problem is actually a thoracic issue.
Totally.
Just a complete lack of mobility in the thoracic spine, and that's from, as Ruston said, scrolling on the phone, sitting on the computer, just weakness and poor habits.
So I'll take it to the next level. Your upper body is 70% of your body weight, right? You have a one spine that supports that 70% sitting on top of hips and a pelvis that are dysfunctional and immobile because you sat starting the age of 5. So yeah, hips are, we're about the hips. Hips don't lie, Shakira says, right? To me, when we measure the body, the most dysfunctional aspect of the body is the hip misalignment. PSI, SASI is elevation, rotation, and then everything else has to compensate to keep the head level, which is called the riding reflex, right? So your hips, to me, determine how wide your spine can actually move. Your knees can actually hinge and your feet can actually flex, extend. And it's this, a lot of people believe in the feet as being the issue, but when you take a step, your foot's not the first thing that moves. Your hip's the first thing that moves. Everything else just follows along. So the more immobile your hips are, the more everything else takes the brunt of that.
But I'm gonna have somebody, I wanna see some good hip exercises. Okay, but Melissa, please go.
Can I address a current affair that we need to talk about? And that would be that.
Someone on the
And turn the kiss cam off.
Yeah.
However, we need to talk about people who are taking GLP-1 medications. When you lose that much weight that fast, you're not going to lose it just from muscle mass. Just from fat mass. You are going to lose some muscle mass. So while you're losing your muscle mass, you are also losing 2 of your proprioceptors that control your range of motion, like everybody has talked about. Mobility and being able to control it. And at the very beginning, Ruston said there's so many nervous system components to mobility, and that includes your Golgi tendon organs and your muscle spindles. And your muscle spindles are in the belly of your muscle, and they react to the length of the stretch. Obviously, as I lose muscle mass, I'm going to lose the number of proprioceptors that I have in muscle spindles. And that also goes for Golgi tendon organs. They're not located in the belly, but they're located closer to the tendon. And they are also not going to be able to send signals if I am losing the muscle mass, because with muscle mass, I also lose those proprioceptors. So when you're working with somebody on GLP-1s, you need to make sure you take that into consideration, that their mobility is not going to be as controlled as someone who is lifting and maintaining that muscle mass.
Okay. So I wanna see some hip exercises.
I do too.
So, yeah, but you're not doing it in that skirt. You can do it in the shorts over there on the end. Can you, anybody, seriously, anybody?
Yeah, where do you want us to do it?
Yeah, do it right in front, baby.
There's no way I can do that.
Gee, there's no way. There's always way.
All right, so I will go back to what Ruston said. The important thing for us to take sight of is that it takes a year on average from the time we're born to figure out actually how to stand. So a lot of times we teach people mobility when they're standing like this and have no flexibility, right? So when he's talking about recreating these rolling patterns, it's really that simple to start people to understand neurologically, to get back to that original education that they've lost, right? So one of the exercises that we teach is really simple, is you just get down in a supine position, right? You're taking gravity away from your body. Your arms are out to the sides, your feet are hip width, and you're literally just rolling to the side, right? It's a very common exercise, but it works in the transverse plane. And what you're really doing is getting the hip mobility back, but you're fixing the PSIS disparity and the hip elevation disparity, which is causing the spinal offset, which is causing shoulder rotation, et cetera, right? And the other one that everybody knows is the piriformis stretch, where you're taking your ankle here and just crossing it down to the floor, and just, you can make it either static or you can make it active. But that gives that also that understanding of how the hips are supposed to actually rotate and or adduct. So these are just basic moves.
Wait, do the figure 4 again, and.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we can even add bridges.
Yeah.
We can add a bridge, right?
I
And
did
so,
that today.
so, yeah, so we can add a bridge, you can push his knee down, there's so many, we're doing internal, external rotation of the hip. Thank you. It's still right. No, but, you know, when he did the bridge, everybody flex their bicep for me, flex your bicep. What happens to the, so if we want to consider this the agonist, what happens to the antagonist, the opposite muscle group, the opposite side?
Stretches out.
Lengthens and stretches, right? So we had him doing a bridge and people see that as like a muscle activation exercise, which it is. But what is it doing to the opposite side of the glute? Right, reciprocal inhibition, right? Or we call it autogenic inhibition through mobility work. We're opening up that psoas and that hip flexor, and it's releasing and relaxing and lengthening. So a little bit of flexibility, but we're mobilizing that hip more. So those are great exercises. One thing I do want to say though, from sitting too much, that's important for people to understand as a fit pro. You start doing mobility work through the hip and you're trying to open it up, open it up, open up. Here's the other problem, you have to see the other side of the coin, because we're in this shortened state. A lot of times we have weak psoas. So don't just stretch and open up the hips and the psoas and not think that it doesn't need strength as well, because usually it's a weak muscle group from sitting too much. So some strengthening exercises through that is important as well.
Yeah, what is it? Show us
Oh,
some.
show you a strengthening, well, so, you know, I might have somebody, and I might put a cone down and they're gonna hold themselves up and they're gonna use that hip flexor to go up and over the cone or something like that. Anything to, you know, activate and use that hip flexor, maybe while opening up the other one would be a good example.
Yeah, one thing that I always say is that stretching in and of itself by itself is the worst thing you can do for the human body. Especially without activation. Because the muscles are tight for a reason. And if you're just stretching out a muscle that's tight, that's just compensating for something else that's not doing its job, you're making the system even more vulnerable. So there has to be a combination of stretch and activation for strength.
I'm very happy right now because I don't even want to say it, but I have not injured my knees in a while. Oh, don't laugh. Somebody's out there laughing. I think it's probably Ed Gilbert. But it's because I combine, like if you ski during the day, I go to a yoga class at night, and those are the exact movements that they integrate. So I think I got a standing desk. My chiropractor said, you're just sitting too much. And I got a standing desk. All right, well, now the webinar's over because I'm satisfied. All right, why is, I'm gonna start with you, Patrick. No, I'm gonna start with you, Melissa.
Start with Patrick.
Okay, but he's gonna talk a long time. It's about
Well,
assessing.
then
So
start with one of them.
now
now.
I'm starting with you. Okay,
I don't wanna play.
okay, all right, somebody else. Why is assessing range of motion important before training? Like, why do you assess your personal training clients and your Pilates students as well?
This is really important because I need to see how they move and where those compensations might be, or if I see any, what I like to term weird movement. You know, this is going to help me to design their program and their workout and to know what we need to focus on and work on. What are their weaknesses? Where are they strong? Where are they compensating? So this is something, when I teach my sessions here, I'm really big on that personal trainers and group exercise instructors need to be programming and choosing exercises for a reason. Yes, we can have a little fun in there, but any person who doesn't know anything can just throw a bunch of exercises together and be like, oh, here you go, I'm going to work you out. There needs to be a purpose and a reason why we're training people. So when you do that prior to your very first session with them, then you have more knowledge of their body. So you should be taking them through some type of a movement assessment. In Pilates, we do their whole entire body, put them up against a plumb line. So we get a lot of information from that. It's a really great thing to do from the beginning with your clients and then program appropriately for them.
I like to do a static screen as well as a movement screen, because a static screen will tell you something, you know, gives you a lot of information. But I had a client a few years ago who came to me and, you know, her static screen, she was really kyphotic and she looked like she was going to be tight in her thoracic spine and lats and the whole upper extremity. And I had her do an overhead squat and she was hypermobile. She was absolutely no control. So much, she was an overcooked noodle. There was no way I was going to stretch with her. I needed to tighten her up. And I wouldn't have seen it if I just looked at her static. I needed to see her moving. And so I like to do a few different, like I'll do a postural screen and then a movement screen that involves an overhead squat, a squat, and then rotation and a few other things.
You guys want, we have time, you want me to teach you
Yeah.
guys some assessments?
Yeah.
This is just based on what they're talking about, so we do movement, we do mobility, right? The joints and stuff like that for assessing, but this is just something super basic we can go through a webinar with. But you talked about joint laxity, you just talked about hypermobility. So has anybody heard of the Beighton scale? So the Beighton scale is a really cool way just to assess joint laxity. It's not telling you everything, but when we talked about joint laxity with females,
Spell it.
Beighton, I believe, Beighton scale.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at is joint laxity, but Melissa, you mentioned hormones, right? Relaxant. So I was working with a college soccer team, all females. We did the Beighton scale. I knew that there was 2 girls that were hypermobile because I used that scale as a way to assess. I told the coach, those 2, you know, and then as a soccer team of all females, they end up all on the same cycle, right? So we kind of knew that generally there was a time where relaxin, that hormone, was getting released, and those 2 were hypermobile. Well, if you take relaxin on top of a hypermobile female, you move them off the scale almost altogether. So now we have hypermobility through these two athletes, and I said, hey, you might want to sit them this game or play them. But unfortunately, one of them was the best player on the team. Coach didn't listen, and she got injured. I didn't say anything about it, like I told you so, but it's just something you can start to understand when we're working with females. If you see they're hypermobile, there are times where you might just want them on a machine or working out in the freezing cold and not doing yoga or more flexible things, right? So just something to pay attention to, but basically it's pretty basic. You do a standing one where you just do a toe touch, right? And if they can get their hands flat on the floor, they're gonna get a point. It's a 9-point scale. The other one's gonna be, if you can hold your hand like this and pull your pinky back. You guys gotta do it with me so I'm not by myself. So pull your pinky back, and if you can get your pinky, basically, if you can get this to a 90-degree angle from your hand, which, ooh, you're pretty close. So if you can look here at Amber, you're seeing almost a 90-degree angle. So she's gonna get a point for that, and you would do the other side. And if you look at, yes, perfect example. If you look at Patrick, he's like me, we're not moving much at all. So there's not a lot of laxity in our joints. The other one is to take your thumb and push it against your forearm as far as you can go, like this. Can you get close to touching? Almost there, but you'd be surprised when you talk to a hypermobile person, their thumb's touching their forearm, no problem. And it's wild to see, but that's a ton of joint laxity. So those are points as well. And then you look at elbows and knees, right? Can they hyperextend at the elbow or the knee? What you're looking for roughly is a 10-degree angle off of that joint where they can hyperextend. So if they've got some, so you might be a 0, which I'm assuming, Patrick, are you closer to a 0? I'm a 0, right? I don't have a lot of joint laxity. It's a it's a genetic predisposition, but it tells me how much laxity I have in my joints. And like you said, when you get these hypermobile people, at least assessing them, they can be aware of it, but it's something quick you can do and easy.
Yeah, so just to add on this is, I'm the posture guy, right? I don't deal with mobility like these guys do, even though that's my background. What we always preach about is that there's two basic different types of muscles. There's dynamic and there's intrinsic. And the definition of an intrinsic muscle is it does not change length with external force. So it's a stabilizer. It's designed to hold a joint or joints collectively, and then your dynamic muscles do contract and release to be able to move you around. Because of sitting too much, because of not moving, the intrinsic muscles are the ones that are affected the most, because they're the framework, they're the nails that hold all your joints together, and over time they lose their proper length in terms of an attachment, origin attachment. So that's where you start to get a hip elevation, or you get a rotation. And what I was preaching is that once you have this molded, dysfunctional, misaligned body, you're then trying to move that around gravity. And so that's where it really puts a lot of pressure on the dynamic muscles, where you then start blowing stuff out, especially joints, because there's not a consistency throughout the body in terms of dynamic balance, right? So when you're talking about assessment, are we assessing the flexibility of a dynamic muscle? Are we assessing the flexibility of a joint stabilizer? Are we doing both, right? And if we don't have a good grasp of that collectively, then it's really, it is hard to assess. But these measures can really predict. That's the one thing that we can do too with the numbers, because we put numbers into measurements. I can look at a report and tell people where they're injured or where they're going to get injured. I've done that on several occasions, and then people come back and how the hell did you know I was going to blow my right knee? I was like, because it was just glaring, right? So that's where assessment really falls into.
One of the things I found very interesting with Align Smart when I did the program was that I can't come and see you every week and get measured. But what we could do is you could do it through Zoom. And I was fascinated how that worked and how it was so spot on. How did you, I mean, I know I'm getting a little off track, but how did you come up with that? Like, and the devices that measure?
Well, great timing. We're launching our new software next month.
Okay.
And one of the things that we're launching is our online visual assessment using AI to actually determine landmarks to measure. Right now, we do it physically. We'll take a photograph and we'll pull points and we do measures. We actually put numbers to it and then put it in the system. It's not as accurate as being in person, but it's the next best thing. And we've gotten it down to the point where we just demonstrated this last month with Mike, my CFO. He had a friend who's a client, and I did an in-person assessment on her. And then I left the room, and then she got online with Michelle, our head of education, and she did an assessment, and we were within 3 points of each other on the scale, which is 0 to 81 points. So we've got it down pretty good.
Okay, okay, how can mobility exercises enhance overall performance?
No, you. Okay, you don't want to go first.
I think mobility really does improve performance, because when you have freedom of movement and good control of that movement, then you perform better. If an area of your body is not restricted through tightness and shortness, then you will perform better because you have freedom of movement. And provided there's control with that it is actual mobility rather than laxity, that it's controllable flexibility, that you have the ability to move where you want to move and not move what shouldn't move, then you perform better.
And I know I'm getting a little off track here, but what about like isolated exercises versus integrated exercises? Like I'm always reading in ACSM guidelines, you know, you want to do more of a integrated program where you're engaging more musculature. What's the advantage of both, the isolating and integrating?
I think it's really good to start with some isolations to build that stability and control, especially if there's a lack of control, lack of movement control. But if you start with some isolations and then build into integration, that it's a really good way to go.
The question was mobility and performance, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of going back to, you know, childhood development and a baby, right? We come out mobile, we build stability from there. If I don't have mobility in the right places and I'm not training for mobility, I will compensate, right? We've said that the whole time. That's where performance goes down, right? So we don't hit PRs, we don't lift as heavy as we could because it's synergistic dominance, right? That we all know that from our basic training, right? We're using the wrong muscle groups because we're out of alignment. We don't have the right mobility and the right muscles allowed to be worked, right? So a good example would be if I can't touch my toes and my glutes don't work and I go start deadlifting, right? What am I going to start using? I'll start using my lower back, my hamstrings, whatever else I can to try to create this deadlift pattern when in fact I should, what we call kinematic sequencing, which is the proper order of muscles being fired for a movement pattern. Now I start using my glutes, my mid back, and then I start recruiting those other muscles secondarily. So that's, I think mobility allows us to actually perform at the highest level, having those in the right places. I mean, that's kind of what I would speak to.
When you said performance, I immediately went to athletes and then I was like, wait a minute, let me talk about my clientele, because I don't work with a bunch of athletes. I work with mostly over 40 people. And so if we can get them to work on their mobility and their flexibility, get to moving better, think about what that translates to in their life and the activities that they want to do. So we have so many people who come into us that can't get down onto the floor and back up. Well, if we can work on that, and strength is a part of it too, but that mobility and flexibility, teach them how to get down and up. Now they can get down on the floor, play with their grandchildren, or they're not afraid that if something happens and they trip and they do fall, that they're just going to have to lie there on the floor. They can actually get up. So what is that going to translate to in your regular person's life who is not necessarily an athlete, and their quality of life and what they can do?
You took the words right out of
Oh,
my mouth.
sorry.
Yeah. Ditto. No, what I was gonna say is it really also boils down to sports specificity and job specificity. What do you do for your living, right? Because you can take a swimmer, for example, like Michael Phelps, and say, well, he's got great mobility. But if you look at him now, I guarantee he doesn't, because now he's not in the water anymore. And when you're in the water, you're 10% of your body weight. That's all he did was train in the water. I have this in my book. This was years ago, but we were at the airport in Las Vegas, and there was a group, a team, a college team, and they didn't have what they were. And I told my wife at the time, I said, they're swimmers. She's like, how do you know they're swimmers? I said, look at their posture, right? Because swimmers are notorious. They're horizontal. They don't stress their body vertically around gravity. They're always in water going this way, and they're really mobile, right? But they were all like this. And so she's like, I'll bet you $20. I said, go. And she went and asked and came back and she gave me $20 because they were swimmers, right? But you talk about people like in Cirque du Soleil. We think, oh my God, they're amazing athletes. Well, they're sport specific. You see them when they're 40, 50, 60 years old, they're broken.
It sounds like Rice Krispie treat.
They're broken. They're broken because, you know, we have this, again, this conditioning that these guys are amazing athletes, which they are, right? But not for an overall, like what you're working with. How do you live through the rest of your life as an 80, 90-year-old healthily? It all depends on what you've done and what you're doing to help prevent and maintain good body mechanics.
Melissa, I wanted to ask you about the proper order, because I know you're Miss Science of flexibility, mobility, yeah? No?
No, I was gonna say, can I jump in on the last question? I was gonna talk about the fact that of the 5 of us sitting up here, there are 2 of us with joint replacements. And I don't think we look at the fact that as we get older, the possibility of having a joint replacement is so much greater, and our medical community drops the ball when it comes to getting us back to playing status, where I was released because I could do moving lunges across the floor. But that doesn't help me be a consistent group fitness instructor. Moving lunges aren't enough for me. So when I had my second hip replacement, I specifically asked to go to one of my past students who was an athletic physical therapist. And I said, my biggest problem was when I had my first replacement, I did not get to work on getting up off the floor. All I got to work on was doing moving lunges, and the PT said, I have to let you go. We dropped the ball for people to stay fit when they have a joint replacement, because most people think, oh, they've got to be in their 80s. All we have to do is make sure they can go up and down the stairs. And our medical community drops the ball that we can't use insurance to pay for a mobility program. So I'll pass down to Kelly for your question about flexibility and mobility.
Sequencing. I like to start with, once you've warmed up, I like starting with some myofascial rolling. I like to start with myofascial rolling and then stretching, mobility type stretching, not necessarily isolated stretching, and then to activation and then to integration is the order I like to work in.
And, can you talk about the shoulder replacement?
The shoulder replacements, plural. For my 2 shoulders. I'm actually going to be talking on joint replacements tomorrow. I think to continue with what Melissa was saying, I see that the medical community and the PT community do not release people into full function. They release them at a designated ability, but that is not full function. And one of the things I've had to do for my 2 successful shoulder replacements is to continue stretching, to continue with my mobility work, and I do it daily. And that has been essential. I did my left shoulder over 10 years ago, and I have a great functioning shoulder now. And that's because I've continued to do my mobility training with it.
There's, you want to talk? Ruston, okay, one of the problems that happens is that when somebody injures part of their body, they do physical therapy for what? They do it for maybe 6 weeks if you're really lucky. Usually it's like 3 weeks. And they do it twice a week and that's it. They're released because that's all their insurance will cover. The issue is they have to do it the rest of their lives. Like, you know, I keep talking about the yoga. I went after the injury and blah, blah, blah. And I had to go back and I worked on the mobility. And my yoga instructor back, when I got back to Chicago from Colorado, she's like, oh my gosh, you're back. And I didn't even realize it, but I kept doing my exercises. And I try to encourage in my friends and clients that you're stuck with this the rest of your life. Keep doing the rehabs.
This is a good point. And this is something that Patrick talked about as far as this is about muscle activation. So mobility, and again, this is my definition, but mobility is the range of motion of a joint. But here's the kicker. You can't move a joint without muscles. And your muscles can't work without those joints. It's this nice fun combo. But it's just like hypertrophy. So if you're working with somebody who's trying to get big and build muscle, right? They don't get big, build muscle, and just stop working out. What happens to the body, right? Goes away. So the same exact thing with mobility. You have to constantly train mobility using muscle activation in order for it to stay there. If you stop, it goes away. So it is an ongoing process. And I wouldn't say you're stuck, but it is something you have to continually do in order to maintain it, or it does diminish. Now, that's not speaking to somebody who's genetically hypermobile, but as far as the muscle and the control of those joints, that's another thing.
So we have a few questions from viewers. If I don't know if you'd like me to pose those to you now.
We have a few questions from viewers. What are they asking? Dan's helping me here.
Oh, Debbie Fogel asks, what if it doesn't feel good in your back when you
What?
do the first two stretches shown, the windshield wipers and
Oh, the first
Yeah.
exercises that were shown for
Yeah.
mobility exercises, which was kind of the windshield wipers on the knee, and then the number 4 and the stretching. What if it doesn't feel good on your back?
Well, this goes to what Amber was saying too, is like what type of exercises should you be giving people, right? If you don't have an assessment, then you really don't understand what exercises to actually suggest, or if you have the license, prescribe those exercises, right? In our bank, we have 417 exercises. The majority of them are isometric, where you're just pressing, releasing against a band or squeezing a block. You're not doing any movement per se because you're working on a different muscle group. So in terms of sequencing, that's kind of what we do is we work isometrically first and then get them into more activation once their body is a little bit more ready to actually take on that movement pattern. So we don't want anybody to feel bad when they're doing something like that. It just means you're not ready for it. You got to do something else aside from that.
And to go into this a little bit more, how often should flexibility and mobility be worked into a routine, and when? That's Melissa, what you wanted to.
Every day, when you train, you do flexibility and mobility. It was short.
Ditto. Yeah, how many of you guys watch and brush your teeth this morning? It's the same concept, except we don't teach you as youngsters to do it continuously as adults. We don't teach kids how to balance a budget either, right? So our whole preaching is you have to understand what your limitations are. Find somebody that can tell you how to get back to your more natural self, but then stay accountable for it. And that's the big thing that is lacking out there is accountability. How do you do it? When do you do it? You should do it every day. But then people are like, well, what should I do? Right? Well, that's kind of why I created this.
It's one of those things that you have to plan, because brushing our teeth is something that we do normal, it's a habit. So now you have to make mobility and flexibility a habit. Even if you can take just 5 minutes out of your day, that can make a difference. Where are you going to plug that in? Are you going to do it in the morning right when you wake up? Are you going to do it after your workout? Is it something you're going to do right before you go to bed? So make that decision now and go ahead, set a timer on your phone, and let's get into that habit and do it daily.
I so agree, actually, but morning is my time. I get up super early. I get up early just so that I can do my morning stretches. The day starts with stretching for me every day.
I do mine right before golf. It works great. I think mobility anytime is an absolute best answer. If I was going to optimize it, I would say mobility work right before your workouts, right before you train someone. So it's a warm up. It's part of the warm up because it includes muscle activation. That gives me a window of time to load the body and actually hit the right muscle groups. So I'm hitting those prime movers. So I would say right before you work out would be optimal.
there was another viewer that wanted to see if somebody could demonstrate some standing hip exercise.
Can somebody demonstrate some standing exercises? It says, yeah, standing exercises for mobility and flexibility.
Specifically for the hip.
For the hip. So a standing lunge, you can either do it with the heel pressed down or the heel lifted. You get the calf if you press the heel down at the same time as the hip flexor on that side, reach the hand up and move into the frontal plane, or step further back, dip down and then shift into the frontal plane, or even add a transverse rotation with it, like that. And that really opens the hip and the thoracic spine.
Thank you very much, you guys. I'm looking, we're like, we've got 1 minute here. That means, is there anything you feel we haven't touched upon? Oh, God, here he goes again.
Drink water, we didn't talk about hydration.
Yeah.
Muscles feed off water, we're a big circuit board, and it's a conductor of electricity. And most of society doesn't drink enough water for you to be able to do anything that we're talking about here.
I thought there was a Pinot Noir that we were supposed to. Okay, I want to thank you all for joining us. Dan, I want to thank you so much for putting this all together. We really appreciate it. Did an outstanding job. And I know Sean Senator is also in our back in, where is it? In Pennsylvania. We're helping to run this. Ruston, Kelly, Amber, Patrick, and Melissa. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm Sara Kooperman, SCW. We're here at Atlanta Mania. We hope to see you at Mania next year. Thank you.